Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Jamie Knowles. I'm the head of technical marketing for ExtraHop.
And my name is Mark Bowling. I'm our Chief Risk, Security, and Information Security Officer at ExtraHop Networks.
So Mark and I got here today on this stage as cybersecurity professionals in very different ways. I started out as a hacker, breaking apart computer systems in the 1990s to see how they worked. I graduated from taking computers apart to breaking into computer systems, and I have the dubious distinction of having been fired from my employers for hacking their email systems and having helped run one of the UK's leading software piracy rings. But before I could cause or get into any real trouble, I decided to apply my curiosity and skills to cybersecurity.
Yes, and I actually came from about as far a direction, different nexus as Jamie could have. I started as an electrical engineering student, went to the United States Navy as an officer. I was a submarine officer, United States Navy, left the Navy, went to corporate America as a consultant for 8-10 months, and then I joined the FBI. In 1995, I went to the FBI Academy, graduated from there, went to Washington Metropolitan Field Office, where I worked a bunch of really cool programs. Eventually, I was a field supervisor and then a field executive. And I even worked for Director Mueller as a subject matter expert on cyber and counterterrorism, 2002 to 2004, as part of the director's office.
So Mark's got an unusual story to share with you today, a story that takes place in America's heartland, Wisconsin. A wholesome land dotted with dairy farms, windswept with plains, crisscrossed with rivers, a place defined by family, community, faith, and fellowship. In this place, an old barn stands, and in this musty, dark old barn, a young man sits at a makeshift desk in front of a computer where he burns illegal copies of music and video games onto CDs, among other things. This young man doesn't buy into the values of family, community, faith, and fellowship. He feels scorned by these institutions he sees as worthless.
So this young man's name is Joseph Konopka. Some of you may know him as Dr. Chaos. By day, he's a systems administrator. By night, he's a hacker, an anarchist. His goal is to sow mayhem. If you've ever seen those commercials where mayhem like me, that is Dr. Chaos before it became an insurance commercial, you know? He was angry, he was isolated, and in fact, he gathered around himself a group of adolescent followers that eventually became known as the realm of chaos. Joseph Konopka and his followers would attack our critical infrastructures. He would attack electrical power systems, he attacked farms. He actually disabled a warning beacon on a radio tower. And eventually he planned to conduct a cyanide gas attack in the Chicago subway system.
So, Mark, how and when did you initially get involved with this case involving Joseph?
And Jamie, that's a great question. At that time in the FBI, we were driving what are called intelligence-driven investigations. And I started with 3 pieces of intelligence, and then through local law enforcement, we brought those 3 pieces together. The first piece of intelligence was when I was attending what was called InfraGard. It's the FBI's public-private outreach organization. At InfraGard, the chief security officer or the director of security named Tom Hells came up to me. He said, Mark, we have electrical power distribution substations that are being attacked. Somebody's cutting the locks, cutting the concertina wire top the security enclosures, and then throwing it across what are known as the feeder arrays. When that was done, it would short out the electrical power distribution to that region, causing what we would know as a localized blackout. Didn't know what to do with it. All we knew was that we had some type of attack going on. The second element of intelligence that came in was when I was sitting at my desk, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was the program coordinator for the Milwaukee Field Office's cyber program. I get a call. I get a complaint from a local business up there. They had had a system administrator who engaged in misconduct. Cool. I have an internal misconduct investigation. Those are fun. I hop in my car, drive 2.5 hours north from Milwaukee to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Green Bay, Wisconsin, I'm sitting here talking to this guy. I say, so what's going on? He says, why are you bothering me? The person you really need to be talking to is the systems administrator over at Infinity. All right. Second piece of intelligence. The third piece of intelligence was I had done a presentation at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Madison, Wisconsin. Some guy comes up to me after the presentation. I kind of get to know him. I open him as what I call a gray hat source. He was a confidential source through the FBI. And at that point, I start meeting with him. He gets in touch with me one day. I run over to Madison. That's west, not north, not south, goes west, 1 hour west. I sit down with him. He says, I know who Dr. Chaos is. Cool. I didn't know a thing about Dr. Chaos. I'd never heard of Dr. Chaos, but now I had a third piece of intelligence.
How did you start connecting all?
Well, everything came together. I was sitting at my desk once again, and I get a call, Brown County Sheriff's Office. They say, hey, we found a bunch of kids out, and they were burning dumpsters. I said, what did they say? Well, they were part of the realm of chaos. I go, wait a minute. Tom Nettles had told me about electrical power distribution substations being attacked around Green Bay. I heard the word chaos from my buddy in Madison. And oh, by the way, I had a guy, an internal misconduct subject, tell me about, hey, there's a guy over at Infinity Technology in Green Bay. I hop in the car, drive 2.5 hours north again. I sit down. They have the two young offenders, and because they're juvenile offenders, I have to interview them with somebody representing them. It's called in loco parentis. So it's me, guy named Lance Catalano. He was the detective from the Brown County Sheriff's Office. Brown County, by the way, is the county in northeast Wisconsin where Green Bay is. If you don't know where Green Bay is, you need to watch more football, by the way. Okay? Am I loud enough? Do I need to hold this closer? Okay, I'm good. All right. So I sit down with them. I sit down with the kid. You've got the representative of the state, the kind of the youth adolescent council type person at the Brown County Sheriff's Office. And I'm sitting there with them. I say, so tell me, what's going on? Well, I'm part of the realm of chaos. Realm of chaos. Please tell me, what is this realm of chaos? Well, we follow Dr. Chaos. Intelligence element number 2. Well, tell me what you guys do. Well, we run around and we knock out power stations. Intelligence point number 1. So now we're putting this investigation together. So after I debrief this kid, I can't really interrogate him because he's a juvenile. First thing I do is I sit down and say, hey, I'm not going to throw you in jail. You're a juvenile. I don't throw kids in jail. I just need you to be honest with me. If you're honest with me, I don't go to the United States Attorney and say, hey, we need to try him as an adult. That makes me feel honest in general. So we have this conversation. I get the intelligence, and we find out that Joseph Konopka, Dr. Chaos, was what? A system administrator at Infinity Technology. So now we tied the third piece of intelligence together. What Joseph was doing was he was using games. He set up a local area network. You remember what those are? Local area networks. Okay, we remember what those are. Okay. He set up a local area network and Infinity Technology. He recruited these kids with games he had pirated. He recruited them with music that he had illegally copied. They would come, they'd play Doom from about 7:30 p.m. until maybe midnight, just short of midnight. And then they would run out and burn dumpsters, burn garbage on the street, and knock off these electrical power distribution substations. These substations, I'm just going to say substations. Yeah, I don't need to repeat myself, right? Okay, cool. Knock off the substation. So we say, here's what we're going to do. We put together an ad hoc task force, kind of a stand-up task force. It included Brown County Sheriff's Office. It included the Green Bay PD and a couple other sheriff's offices where there had been attacks on these substations. We put together a plan. We put Infinity Technology under surveillance. We put Joe Konopka under surveillance. We sit there. We got guys on the roads nearby. I'm sitting there with Lance Catalano in an unmarked car looking at the parking lot at Infinity. Guess what? All these kids start showing up. Parents dropping them off, literally. Kids show up, they go in, 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, just about a quarter till midnight. They all come out and they pile in Joe's car. They run out. Like the third thing they do is they light up the dumpster. Seriously, it's a heart attack. We slip in, we grab Joe. All right. Some of the departments, the Green Bay PD grabs most of the kids. Lance and I, we grab Joe. We take him back to the Brown County Sheriff's Office where I do an interrogation. So I do this 2-hour interrogation with Joe. During this interrogation, he actually says, "Hey, you understand?" I go, "What do you mean, Joe?" He says, "You know technology." We probably spent the first hour talking about local area networks and TCP/IP and how textbook CCIEs really didn't know what they're doing. You know, they studied for a test, they take the test, they can't do the darn thing in enough, right? Yeah, I'm gonna get away because I see people shaking their heads, yeah. And so I built what's called rapport. I built rapport with Joe, and we spent 2.5 hours talking. He gives me a full confession. I have him on the attacks on the critical infrastructure. I have him on the software piracy. I have him on the arson. And he even tells me about some things I didn't know about. He climbed this radio tower, probably about a 350-foot radio tower, and removed the red bulb at the very top, the navigation warning beacon, because he wanted to see what would happen as the plane ran into the tower. Really, Joe? Way to go.
So at some point you must have had the opportunity to go and raid his house.
Well,
What's his house?
so what we did is when we took a look at his house, after we debriefed as many of the children, the juveniles, they weren't really children, they were young adults, okay? When we debriefed them. So we debriefed them. I got the full confession from Joe. And at that time, while I was debriefing Joe, then you had the Green Bay PD and some of the other Brown County Sheriff's Office detectives. They were getting a search warrant, a state search warrant for Joe's house. I say, cool. And now this is probably about 3 in the morning. I don't remember when I got home that morning. This is like 3 in the morning, and it's December. It's December in Green Bay. Anybody watch football here? Can I have a hand? Okay. You know when they talk about the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin? That was Joe's yard, frozen tundra. So we show up at his house. This is a very, very modest house. It's a farmhouse, okay? I don't even think it had a garage, but it was an old farmhouse. In the back, there was a barn in disrepair. I go in and say, "Hey, Mr. Konopka, I'm Mark with the FBI. Can I have your consent to search the house?" He says, "Yeah, go ahead." I didn't even need the state search warrant. We go in, we find a bunch of stuff. We find his room had all these, like, if you know Megadeth rock group, you know what Screamo rock is? So you go Megadeth, you go like 4 degrees to the left. All right, and some of that is like really gothic, and some of it is borderline white supremacist. That's what Joe was listening to. Apparently, what he would do is after they played Duke for 2.5 hours and shot other things, virtually, they'd hop in a car and they'd get all charged listening to, the Screamo rock. He had posters up in his room. His room was a mess. When you think of Dr. Chaos, that was his room. It was quite appropriate, come to think of it. So then what we did, we found in his room a laptop. I go out to the barn. He literally had a computer lab set up in the barn. He had a Linux workstation that he would log into Infinity Technologies remotely, so he could hack through Infinity. he had his own workstation of Windows that was connected to a storage array. That's where he'd stored all his pirated software. And then he had a burner rack where he would burn the software. And he had this really, really cool printer. I wanted to steal it. And that's, those little round labels that you print to slap on CDs. Does anybody here remember jewel cases? All right, there we go. You guys are as old as I am. I'm like a dinosaur. So not quite Jurassic, Paleozoic, maybe, but not Jurassic. So we would print the labels that went in the jewel cases so that the pirate software looked legit. He would go to, I believe he would go to, what do they call, swap meets, and they would, he'd set up a little booth and he'd just sell software and use it for like pennies on the dollar. So, but the big thing is we seized all that evidence. That was digital evidence that I needed to see.
So how did you conduct a forensic operation like it?
Absolutely. This is days of yore. So we had the forensic examination, but I did something that was really important. I went to the United States Attorney's Office and I said, I want a secondary search warrant. I want a digital search warrant for all of this stuff. Because what could happen? If I didn't do that, then Mama could come and say, hey, I want you to return all of Joe's stuff. So now I had a secondary federal search warrant based on all of the probable cause that we had developed. So basically I made an image of his Linux laptop. I made an image of his Microsoft workstation that was connected to the storage array. I made an image of the entire storage array. And then I made images of several, probably 20 to 30 of the individual CDs, especially the ones that were labeled. If they were labeled, those were ones that I could show he was pirating rather than personal use. So I made images of the ones that were labeled. I sent the images of the ones that were labeled out to the Business Software Association and the Electronic Arts Association. They're the ones who kind of work with law enforcement for games. I can't remember the name of the music association that we sent it out to, but we worked very closely with them to analyze both the binaries or the files, the folders that were on the storage array, as well as the stuff that was burned. We wanted to prove that what was stored on the storage array was actually what was burned into the CD, because that was one of our major, at that time, one of our major charges was going to be software piracy, intellectual property rights violation.
So that's not me and probably some of the guys in the audience. We know about digital forensics. A lot of us have taught ourselves how to do that sort of thing in the past. How did you learn about digital forensics? Was this something you picked up during your career at the FBI, or was it something you did earlier?
So this is something I picked up. This is something I picked up in the FBI. So I've been an electrical engineer, and so I learned about 8086, like not even 586 or 686, 8086 chips. I programmed assembly language on 8086. I know, like rocks and knives, split tools. And so I understood the basics of what I would call microcomputer architecture. Well, after the Navy, I went to join DDS, Electronic Data Systems, as a consultant. My job there was to interconnect it's a Hamtramck plant, Hamtramck, Michigan, a Cadillac plant. And what they had was they had all these programmable logic controllers and industrial control systems. And they never connected those to a mainframe backbone, a broadband, not a mainframe backbone, but a broadband backbone. So my job was to make these standalone PLCs and industrial controllers talk to the company's General Motors computer network. So I really learned about networking. I really learned the nuts and bolts of Ethernet. I learned the nuts and bolts of TCP/IP. So I wasn't really loving working in corporate America, so I joined the FBI. I joined the FBI and I said, hey, I would like to go, work drugs in some Midwest city. No, they said, you're going to Washington, D.C. to work technology. Cool. I get to Washington, D.C. in 1995, and I'm one of the original members of what's known now as the FBI's Computer Analysis Response Program, or CART, Computer Analysis Response Team. At that time, the FBI's program was not formalized. We have like 8 or 10 courses now that really match what SANS and DC Council do. We didn't have any training, so I was literally taking it directly from IACIS, International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists. And so I learned from them, and I kind of learned computer forensics. I'm going to call it digital forensics or forensics from memory at rest, because it's different from memory in transit, but digital forensics from memory at rest, while the FBI was developing our program back in 1999 and 1997. 3 years later, I'm in Wisconsin, and I've got all this stuff, and here I am looking at it. One of the cool things I've done is I've taken a Linux certification, or actually it's Unix, really Unix certification course, like 4 courses. Yeah, you're laughing. It wasn't Solaris, all right, man. But this wasn't even Linux, but that prepared me to conduct an analysis. These are the cron jobs that Joe put in place to delete all the administrative audit logs at Infinity Technology, because he was afraid people would come and find them. So I was able to analyze the original evidence, make sure that it was actually copied properly in accordance with best practices. I was able to look at the logs. I was able to analyze all of the data, particularly, some of the actions that we put into place. You know what a smoking gun is? A smoking gun is a cron job that deletes administrative logs. That's a smoking gun. Thanks your question.
Yeah, that's true. So that you told us there, you took some sort of idea what you made.
Well, so what happened is in December of 2000, we're getting ready to charge him. Oh, no, that's December of 2000, so we conducted the initial investigation. Moved forward a couple of months. I'm now conducting a very, very detailed investigation of Joseph Konopka. I'm meeting with Wisconsin Energies and finding out all of the substations that are attacked. I'm sitting down with all of the other 15 members of the Realm of Chaos and finding out, what do you remember? What did you do? What did Joe show me? Do you have copies of the pirated software he gave you? And then I'm actually mapping what they did on what night. We took almost from the police reports track the route that they took in northeast Wisconsin. So it's a very, very complex investigation. By probably March, or now I'm going to say it's a little bit later, I'm going to say probably May, June, what we're seeing Joseph Konopka and engaged in 86 separate criminal acts. If you add all the software piracy, the arson, and the attacks on critical infrastructures together, you had a very, very, very compelling case against Joseph Konopka.
It's interesting that here in the US, in what most people would argue freeze countries as well. By the way, guys, we have freedom in the UK too. Smart, talented young men like Joseph Konopka decide to do these sort of things with their life. What's your take?
So I'm not a psychologist, but I've had a lot of training. One of the cool things about the FBI is I get to study criminal psychology, but I've also had a chance to study psychology of different types of criminals, including spies, etc., including cyber criminals. And one of the things I identified with Joe is that Joe was highly isolated, and I felt that what he missed, and one of the things that contributed heavily to his decisions, was the lack of any strong authority in his life, the kind that you would frequently get from a father. Okay, not saying everybody has that father, but you need some authority that they help keep you in line. And so what I did with Joe is, what I understood from Joe is that he was angry at society. And Joe was, in a way, very, very bitter. What I think I saw with Joe was that he was probably one of those kids, and he was brilliant. He was brilliant. He was one of those kids that sits in class completely bored. And when young men get bored, they get fidgety. And the teachers see that as rowdy. And so you have this fidgety, bright kid, he's bored in class. Now he's this rowdy kid. And now the teacher wants to address it in the worst possible way. And so Joseph Konopka became isolated. He was probably marginalized in his education experience. And I think that's what drove him to be angry at society, to want to become an anarchist, and in fact, to really try to live out his namesake, Dr. Chaos. One of the interesting things I noted was when I searched his bedroom, I found a copy of a book called The Anarchist Cookbook. Now, The Anarchist Cookbook was not written by Uncle Fester, but this copy had been signed by Uncle Fester. Uncle Fester is this guy named Stephen Priestley. Some people are nodding their heads, yeah. Lived near Green Bay, Wisconsin, and he had signed the Anarchist Cookbook and given it to Joe as a gift. And I think Joe saw Uncle Fester as his role model.
So today we have opportunity. Suddenly, I was testing overreacting that simply didn't exist in the music of ice. Right, was outside when Jones. Listen, wow. Ignore. You have the right sort of mindset today. That I'd say, given it.
Absolutely. Let me tell you something about Joe. Joe was unbelievably talented. He was smart. He is probably one of the top three. I've interrogated a lot of people, very dangerous people. And from what I saw, he's probably one of the intellectually, technically one of the top 3 or 4 most talented and intelligent people I have ever interviewed. It was a fun interview. And I'll tell you what, I would have hired him at the time. And in fact, I probably, if I felt like I could trust him as a human, I would hire him today. Serious as a heart attack. And so let me tell you what I wanted to do at the time was I was going to flip him. He was already being very cooperative. I wanted to flip him to be an operational source for me. I was literally hoping to direct him against Russian organized crime. Why not? He's familiar with the internet. He knows the dark side of the internet. He knows what happens on the dark side. He would have been perfect. But unfortunately, that's not what happened.
So, all right, that's not what happened. Let's tell you what went after he confessed.
So after he confessed in Brown County, well, let me put it this way. I was sitting there, I think it's probably a Sunday afternoon. Krista and I are home in, suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Kristen's my wife. And I get a call from Joe's mom. Now, for the last several months, I've been putting together this very, very, very complex case. And in putting together this complex case, and the longer it took, the more nervous and scared Joe got. That's just the way it is. So Joe's mom calls me up. I think she called the Milwaukee field office. They transferred her to my home phone. She said, Mark, you got to talk to Joe. He's going to run. You got to arrest him. I said, Mrs. Konopka, I cannot arrest Joe. He has not been charged. I need a federal grand jury indictment to charge him. I don't have that yet. She said, Mark, Joe's going to run. I said, well, tell him that he shouldn't run. Tell him that if he runs, it's just going to get worse for him. And so then he ran.
So he becomes a fugitive at that point, doesn't he?
Yes, he became a fugitive.
What happens next?
Well, what happened next was 9/11. Twin Towers happened. And guess what everybody cared about after that? Prior to 9/11, the number one priority of the FBI was cybercrime. After 9/11, you know what the number one priority was? Counterterrorism. Exactly. So guess what Joseph Konopka is a perfect candidate to be characterized as? He goes from being a hacker and an arsonist to being a domestic terrorist. He's an anarchist. Yeah, that's exactly what he became. And so I actually shifted gears also for the WAP. So I've been setting up what's known as a cybercrime task force for the state of Wisconsin, working with various police departments and sheriff's offices and other federal agencies. That got put on hold. Turned right around, or task force, of course I know task force. I started setting up the state of Wisconsin's counterterrorism task force. I started recruiting sources to participate and help the United States in what we call the global war on terror, GWOT. And that becomes my focus. Here I am recruiting terrorists, recruiting Shiite Muslims who hated the Saddam Hussein regime, recruiting different folks based on who they may have an interest in reporting on. I love doing that. And then I get a phone call. It's about 2:30 in the morning.
And so, 2:30. Well, this is probably something you were expecting.
It was something I was not expecting. It just came out of the blue. So I get this phone call, and it's the University of Illinois Chicago Police Department. And they tell me, do you have a case open on a fugitive named Joseph Konopka? I say, yes, I do. They say, we have him in custody. I say, cool. So instead of driving an hour and a half west to Madison, Wisconsin, or as I had previously done twice, driving 2.5 hours north to Green Bay, Wisconsin, I hop on my bureau car and I drive an hour and a half south, downtown Chicago. Joe's in custody, and Joe is being held in what's known as the Cook County Temporary Lockup. The Cook County Temporary Lockup is not a place where choir boys go, all right? We're talking real winners, Latin teens, really bad bikers, and we're talking street crews. These are not good people, and Joe's in there with Michael, and I say, Joe, you shouldn't have run. We kind of talk. I find out that Joe has been literally living underneath the city of Chicago. So there's an organization called CUE, C-U-E, stands for Chicago Underground Exploration. And as a member of CUE, that's what he was caught doing. He was caught breaking into the steam tunnels under the University of Illinois Chicago. They have these tunnels that connect all their buildings that are in steam piping. And so Joe literally was in there exploring one night, set off an alarm. UICPD catches him. We've got Joe on our hands. So I start to interrogate him. I say, Joe, talk to me. What's going on? I'm hoping that all he's been doing is breaking into tunnels, but that's not what was going on. So Joe had literally picked the lock. He had previously taught himself how to, you have time.
That's right.
We have time to still time. He had literally taught himself how to pick locks, probably from one of these Uncle Fester books. And then based on that, in a side tunnel, one of the supporting side tunnels in the Chicago subway, he had picked the lock of the storage room, and that is literally where he's living. So I said, okay, you're hanging out with Q, you're living in the Chicago subway. Tell me what else you got going on. Well, I've got some poison. Awesome. Tell me about, well, I've got rat poison. What else do you have? Rat poisons. Anybody know the typical, what the typical name is for rat poison? Potassium cyanide. All right, so he has potassium cyanide. What else got there? Well, I've got some hydrochloric acid. Oh crap. Does anybody here know what happens when you mix hydrochloric acid with potassium cyanide? You get cyanide gas. Like two derivatives off sarin gas, which is a nerve toxin, right? Okay, so now I go, okay, so I say, all right, this is worse than I thought it was going to be. I thought I was just going to load him up and take him back to Wisconsin. I literally sit with Joe for 4.5 hours. I take over 20 pages of notes. He gives me a 14-page handwritten confession. He confesses to everything in Milwaukee and everything in Chicago.
So he ran, but he didn't get far. You eventually caught up with him. So what ended up happening to Joe?
So Joe, what happened with Joe was I took the intelligence that he provided to me and I gave it to the Chicago FBI field office. I said, okay, we know we have a road. We know there's potassium cyanide. We know there's potassium cyanide. We know that it's somewhere in the subway system. The FBI's counterterrorism task force in Chicago and their evidence response team goes down into the subway. They find the room. There is dust in the air that we believe is the dust from the rat poison. We literally have to isolate that leg of the Chicago subway system, and then the evidence response team guys have to put on these Tyvek suits with respirators, and that's how they clean it up. It is basically a toxic waste zone, and now it just blows up. Now Joseph Konopka is not just an angry teenager; he's now domestic terrorist #1. Joseph Konopka was the first American charge under the Patriot Act, the 2001 Patriot Act, for weapons of mass destruction.
He's sort of raised about. What did you learn from this case?
Well, let me finish talking about what happened with Joe. Yeah. So Joe pled guilty in 2003 to all of the criminal charges in Chicago, weapons of mass destruction charges. In 2004, he pled guilty to what was going on up in Wisconsin, computer crimes, and the attacks on critical infrastructure. So we had Joe pled guilty, and then what we did is he literally went to jail, and he got out in 2019. I almost expected Joe to be here, literally. I was like, is Joe here? But no. So he went to jail for 16 and his 20-year sentence. And I think part of that was, in fact, he was overcharged with weapons of mass destruction statute. That charge was appealed, even though he pled guilty, because if you look at the text of the statute, it was clear that the Northern District of Illinois had over-aggressively charged him based on the actual action he had taken.
That kind of thing never happens, does it?
No, never. There are never attorneys who are overcharging anything to make a name for themselves. That never happens in the U.S. justice system. Nod your head, okay? All right.
So, what did you learn from this?
So I learned a couple things. First of all, I had some experience as an FBI agent at the time, but this really brought a lot of different elements of what I call intelligence-driven investigation together. One of the huge things was maybe ask your sources more questions when they offer you intelligence you've never heard. One of the things was, I think, liaison with our critical infrastructures is super important. If you're an FBI agent working cyber, you need to know the CISOs at the hospital and the CISOs at the electrical power company and the CISOs at the water and sewage company and the natural gas company. You need to have these relationships. The other thing is you need to understand the value of flipping sources. All of this started with a couple of teenage kids who weren't even adults telling me everything they knew. Sat down with them, treated them like human beings, listened to them more than their dads were. It's amazing what the kids would tell you. And so the value of flipping sources, establishing sources, and then, of course, collaborating with local law enforcement, the sheriff's office, the Green Bay PD, the Chicago PD. All of these lessons, those equipped me for my future experience in the FBI.
Have you ever considered getting back in touch with Joe? Do you have any outstanding questions you would like to ask?
I always want to know why you run. Why did you run, Joe? Why you ran? I just didn't want to go to jail, of course, but I was hoping to keep him out of jail. I thought I could get him 3 or 4 years federal probation, and he could work that off. Now, I was going to work him hard. Yeah, he was going to learn Russian by the time this is over. That's the Cyrillic alphabet, so learn it. But no, I was very disappointed that he actually ran. But then once we found him with the cyanide and understood his mental state, there was no turning back at that point. So I think that I'd like to know why he ran, but I'd really like to, I like to understand the motivations of the criminals and the intelligence officers that I've worked with. And I just want to know what made you so angry. Was there one thing that flipped the switch, or was it just something that built up over time? Was there a straw that broke the camel's back?
So looking back on this case, is there anything we've done?
Absolutely. Two things. When I met with my source in Madison, I should have said, well, who is Dr. Chaos? And oh, by the way, why are you offering me